Welcome everyone to our detailed critique of the Grade 7 History Traditional Assessment. But before we get into it, let's meet our team.
I am
I'm
Jonali
Daniel
Grant.
Ferran.
I am Jonali Grant.
Alright, so now that we've met our team, let's see what we'll be exploring today. So this critique examines Grade 7 History Traditional Assessment based on item quality and guidelines for item construction, alignment to the table of specification, and this includes alignment between the instrument and the specific objectives, alignment with lesson emphasis and marks allotted, as well as alignment with the DOK levels targeted. We also examine the grammar and mechanics used throughout the instrument and give recommendations at the end. So item quality and guidelines for item construction. So according to Juan Grunland 2013, this involves the systematic development of assessment items, both selected response and constructed response that are clear, valid, fair, and capable of accurately measuring the intended learning outcomes. Well, let's look at this beginning with section A, the multiple choice questions. So this section reflects a basic understanding of item construction principle. However, its effectiveness is limited by weaknesses in the alternatives and a few key technical violations. The first of which is the plausibility of distractors. Now, plausibility of distractors involves constructing incorrect options that are sufficiently realistic to prevent test takers from easily ruling them out. One specific violation of this rule is question 4. So question 4 asks, what helped the Taínos and Kalinagos travel safely across the Caribbean Sea? Distractor B says they used airplanes across the sea. Now this is anachronistic and requires no specific knowledge of the topic to eliminate, failing the core purpose of a distractor. So one recommendation we would give is to replace the airplanes option with they followed written maps and charts, which is more plausible for the time period, though incorrect for the groups in question. This change would better discriminate between the students who know the material and those who do not. Another technical violation is avoid clues. Now, this emphasizes eliminating all forms of unintended guidance within and across items, including identical wording between the stem and key, reliance on textbook style phrasing, or overlaps between questions that reveal answers. One specific violation of this rule is seen within question 3 and question 4. Question 3's distractor C implies the belief that travel by sea was not done. However, the stem of the very next question, question 4, explicitly asks what helped the Taínos and Kalinagos travel safely across the Caribbean Sea. This directly links the two questions and disobeys Rule 5 of item construction. But now that we've seen the avoiding clues rule, Ms. Scott is going to walk us through the final technical violation seen in section A, and then analyze the remaining sections of item quality and guidelines for item construction. Ms. Scott? So one specific recommendation we would give is to eliminate the clue violation by rewording the distractor C in question 3 so that it does not suggest an answer to question 4. Specifically, avoiding statements in the distractors that imply the Taínos and Kalinagos did not travel by sea. So question 3, distractor C, becomes they develop tools and techniques to use local resources effectively. But now that we've looked at avoiding clues, Ms. Scott is going to walk us through the final technical violation of section A and then analyze the remaining sections of item quality and guidelines for item construction. Ms. Scott?
Thank you, Danye. Now we will be moving on to the technical violations. The use of negatives. The avoid negative rule recommends constructive item stems positively to minimize cognitive confusion and enhance clarity. The negative paraphrasing includes terms like not, never, and always can mislead test takers or draw attention away from the intended learning outcomes, compromising the validity of the assessment. Now looking at the violations of avoid negative rule for multiple choice question number 6, which states which of the following material was not used by the Taino or Kalinago to build their homes. So question 6 is framed in the negative. While sometimes necessary, negative phrasing can confuse students and may assess reading skills more than content knowledge. Now here's a recommendation for question 6 of the multiple choice. Reframe negatively worded items into positive statements whenever possible to reduce confusion and ensure the question assesses content knowledge rather than reading skills. So, this may require a change in the alternatives, which would state which material was primarily used by the Taino and Kalinago people to cover the roofs of their homes. Moving on to the short essay question section. This is a well structured item that assesses higher order thinking. The prompt is designed to elicit a response that integrates factual knowledge and personal reflection and justification. While the item is structured appropriately, it will be noted later in the presentation that it has some misalignment with table of specification and aspects of instruction related to grammar and mechanics, which will be addressed later in the presentation. And for section C, the short answer question section, this section uses a math stimulus to assess both knowledge and application skills. While the item is structured appropriately, there are minor issues with grammar and verb choice, as well as major misalignments with the table of specification, which will also be discussed in their respective sections of the presentation. Now for section D, the truth or false section, this section demonstrates adherence to most truth or false items constructed principles. The statements are clear, concise, and avoid absolute terms such as always or never. However, the instructions are somewhat unclear and could be reworded to better guide students on how to respond, which may affect the item's overall quality and usability. Now moving on to the vague instruction section of section D. The instruction reads, read each question carefully. State if the statement is true or false and write your answer in the space provided. Each correct answer is worth 1 mark. Are somewhat vague because while there is a blank space next to each statement, it does not explicitly indicate how students should record their answers. For example, F or T or truth or false. This ambiguity could cause minor confusion or inconsistencies in responses, potentially affecting the clarity and reliability of the statement. Moving on to section E, the matching section. This section presents a matching exercise that demonstrates balance and validity with premises and responses focused on the same concept and comparable in complexity. While the item aligns with best practice in terms of content, it falls short on other guidelines, including readability and cognitive load, as well as the conventional numbering and labeling of premises and responses. Adherence to balance and validity guidelines. It is considered best practice to make the premises and responses in a matching item homogeneous, that is, similar in theme or structure, to prevent students from getting the correct answer based on the format, according to Marlene 1986. As you can see in the example below, thank you. Violation of readability and cognitive load guidelines. Many test constructions guides recommend putting the premises on the left and the responses on the right. The idea is that premises, which may be longer or more complex, should be easier to scan, and shorter responses on the right reduces the cognitive load, according to Marlene 1986. So the recommendation for section E, the matching section, is to swap columns entries to ensure alignment with readability guidelines.
Thank you, Nastasia. And now I'll be looking at the alignment with the table of specifications. So a table of specifications is a test or assessment blueprint that outlines the relationship between the learning objectives, instructional content, and the assessment items, ensuring that there's an alignment and a balanced coverage of what was taught according to Notar, Zweilicki, Wilson, and Younger 2004. On the right, you can see the TOS used by this traditional assessment. Firstly, let's look at the alignment between the instrument and the unit's objectives. So this is the most significant area of weakness in the assessment. The test instrument deviates substantially from its blueprint, which is the table of specifications, which severely threatens its content validity. So misalignments with objectives. So in section A, the multiple choice questions, Question 6, which asks about building materials, is incorrectly labeled as assessing objective 6, the appearance of the people. The content of the question aligns more appropriately with objective 2 or objective 4, indicating a major error in item coding. Now, in section B, the short essay question, the prompt, which asks students to choose a role within the society and to justify it, assesses knowledge of the social structure and the life of the indigenous groups from Objective 3. It is incorrectly labeled as assessed in Objective 2, which is to appreciate the Taino and the Kalinago's ability to manipulate the natural environment. Moving on to section C, which is the short answer questions. So there's an alignment error. The section claims to govern objectives 1 and 4. However, the questions cover content related to objectives 1, 2, and 3, but lacks any item that genuinely assesses objective 4, which is to assess the nature of Tainos, Kalinagos, and architecture. Still on section 3, there was also content on alignment. It's question 3 says explain 3 challenges that the Tainos face when the Kalinagos raided their villages. This does not appear to align with any of the stated objectives on the table of specifications. Section D, which was the true and false and the matching, these sections align with their respective objectives. And now I'll be looking at the misalignment with the lesser emphasis and the marks allotted. So there was major misalignment with Objective 1. On the TOS, it clearly mandates that Objective 1, which is to locate on a map of the Caribbean the settlements of the Taino and the Caledano villages, it should account for 70% of the total marks, which is 17 marks out of 100. And it specifies that it should assess via a 2-mark multiple choice question and a 50-mark short answer question. However, on the test, there are no multiple choice questions for Objective 1. It is assessed only in Section C, Question 1, which is worth only 4 marks. This means the objective is under assessed by 30 marks, completely disregarding the instructional emphasis defined in the TOS. Then there's also Objective 4. The Objective 4, which is to assess the nature of the Tainos and the Kalinagos architecture, is also weighed at 70 marks to be assessed by a 2-mark multiple choice question and a 50-mark short answer question. But on the actual test, as you can see here, it includes 2 multiple choice questions, questions 1 and 2, labeled as assessing Objective 4, totaling approximately 2 to 4 marks. The short answer component for this objective is integrated into Section C with a map-based questions, but there isn't a dedicated 50-mark question as specified in the TOS. The weighting is significantly less than the 70 marks that was stated. Now I'll be moving on to depth of knowledge. So a depth of knowledge is a framework used to determine the degree of cognitive rigor required in an assessment according to Francis 2017. All 10 questions in this section require the student to identify, recall, or recognize specific facts, terms, or definitions that were explicitly taught. For example, identifying specific building materials from question 6, recalling the definition of the Nitianos, question 8, or recognizing the stated purpose of the encomienda system, question 9. The cognitive process involves retrieving information from memory without necessarily needing to analyze or apply it to a new context. Despite this, there were some level of DOK level mismatch. For example, Objective 4. The TOS identifies Objective 4, which is to assess the nature of the Tainos and the Kaladnagos agriculture, as requiring a DOK level 3, which is strategic thinking. This level requires students to use reasoning, develop a plan, and draw a conclusion from said evidence. But on the test, items labeled for question 4, which is multiple choice questions number 1 and 2, operate at a DOK level 1, which is to recall. Question 1 asks, why did the Taino's build large circular houses? And question 2 asks to identify a feature of the Kalinago house. These questions only require students to remember and recall a fact, not to assess or evaluate anything. There is a clear disconnect between the intended cognitive rigor on the TOS table and the actual task demanded of the student on the test. So we have started looking at the domains of learning. To continue this analysis with sections B through D and to walk us through the grammar and the final recommendations, here is Miss Grant.
So now let's take a look at section B, the short essay question, which is assessed in Objective 2 and falls under the affective domain and is mapped to DOK Level 3, which involves strategic thinking, reasoning, and personal justification. So the item which reads, imagine living in a Taino or Kalinago community where residents have to work together, write what role you would choose to play and for what reasons. No more than 200 words, and that's for 50 marks. So this item doesn't strongly align with Objective 2, but it does correspond well to the expectations of the assigned DOK level, which is Level 3. So by prompting students to imagine themselves in a Taino or Kalinago community and defend the role they would choose, the item requires them to draw on their understanding of social roles, environmental factors, and cultural practices. This type of reasoning demonstrates the level of depth and cognitive engagement characteristic of DOK Level 3. Now let's take a look at section C, the short answer questions. So although this includes the basic level 1 tasks like identifying island settlements, the items meant to represent level 3 do not reach that standard. Prompts asking students to describe, explain, or discuss stay at DOK level 2 because they only require recall and summarization, not the strategic thinking or justification expected at level 3. As a result, despite what the TOS suggests, this section does not provide the higher order rigor needed to assess complex historical reasoning. Section D includes true or false, so the items ask students to verify a fact. The cognitive task is to match a statement against a memorized truth, like did they wear heavy robes? No, it is a basic recognition task. Section D is misclassified in terms of DOK. So although the TOS assigns objectives 6 and 7 to higher DOK levels, the actual items are simple factual statements that require only recognition of whether a fact is correct. For example, identifying physical characteristics of the Kalinago or determining the basic purposes of the encomienda system does not require strategic reasoning or extended thinking. Because each item can be answered through straightforward recall, the section does not match the higher cognitive demand claimed in the TOS. So now let's take a look at the instruments, grammar, and mechanics. The instrument is generally well presented. However, there are some areas where the clarity and wording could be improved. Let's have a look at that. In section B, in the short essay item, as shared before, the phrase for what reasons is vague. It doesn't clearly indicate the depth of justification expected. This wording may confuse students, so a clear alternative such as provide at least two reasons to support your choice would give more explicit guidance while remaining aligned with the objective. In section C, short answer questions, an item reads, discuss at least three features of the Taino economic system. 3 marks. So the use of the verb discuss is not appropriate for a 3-mark question, as it implies a level of detail that exceeds the scoring allocation. So replacing it with identify and briefly describe would better match the expected response length and reduce ambiguity. Now let's move on to our recommendations. To improve the effectiveness and validity of the assessment, several evidence-based recommendations are proposed. These suggestions address key issues identified in the critique, including misalignment with the TOS, inappropriate cognitive demand, and weaknesses in item construction. Each recommendation is grounded in established assessment literature and focuses on enhancing the test's ability to accurately measure the intended learning outcomes. By applying these improvements, the instrument will better reflect good assessment practices, support fair evaluation of student performance, and strengthen the overall quality of the measurement process. Our first recommendation would be to strictly realign the test to the TOS. It must be fundamentally revised to match the mark distribution outlined in the TOS. Failure to do so invalidates the test as an accurate measure of the intended learning outcomes. Richardson 2008 states that the weight of an objective in an assessment should be proportional to its emphasis during instruction. The 70-mark allocation for Objective 1 must be reinstated. Our second recommendation would be to revise items for appropriate DOK formats. To better assess the strategic thinking required by DOK Level 3, Constructed response formats are more often appropriate than multiple choice items. As assessment expert Susan M. Brookhart, 2010, explains, while it is possible to write complex multiple choice questions, they are most efficiently and effectively used for assessing knowledge, comprehension, and application, which aligns with DOK levels 1 and 2. Whereas constructed response items provide more direct evidence of a student's reasoning and synthesis abilities. Therefore, the DOK-1 multiple choice questions for Objective 4 should be replaced with a constructed response item that requires genuine assessment from the student. Our third recommendation is to enhance the structure quality in multiple choice items. Literature supports that the structure should be plausible answers for students who have not achieved the objective. This is from Granlund and Wall 2008. If you take a look at to your right, for question 4, an option reads they used airplanes to cross the sea. Replacing that with "they followed written maps and charts" provides an historically plausible but incorrect option. This improves the item's ability to discriminate between students who understand the content and those who do not. Overall, the Grade 7 History Assessment shows strengths in layout, readability, and item variety, but also contains issues that affect its quality. Major weaknesses include poor alignment with the table of specifications, inconsistencies in content validity, and mismatches between items and their intended depth of knowledge levels. Several multiple choice items rely on weak distractors, and some constructed response questions do not align with the objectives they were meant to assess. As a result, the test does not consistently measure the higher order thinking outlined in the blueprint. Realigning these items to the TOS, revising questions to match their intended cognitive demand, improving clarity, and strengthening the structures will significantly enhance the assessment's reliability and validity. These revisions will ensure the instrument more accurately reflects the objectives and measures student learning as intended. These are our references. This is the end of our presentation. Thank you so much for listening.